Hello, this is Ray Brooksby with BrightSign. It's Thursday, September 6th in sunny California, except that this morning it's cloudy and a little bit rainy, sort of a summer thunderstorm blowing through. It's 9 o'clock California time. I know you're spread throughout the world in a variety of time zones, and I appreciate that you took the time to join us this morning. Today's subject, as we announced in the email, is to review the capabilities of the newly enhanced web-based interface to the BrightSign network. Now, as I begin, there are a couple of points I should make. We continue to host webinar sessions on a variety of subjects, and in this webinar we will focus very directly and specifically on the web UI. We will not spend time talking about different player models except where it's relevant, but it's not our objective to review the BrightSign product line in detail or to talk about the BrightAuthor authoring software, although we will touch on that today at some point, but we will not go into detail on those subjects. Today's focus is primarily to review the web interface and how that web interface has evolved over time and the direction that we are likely to continue to go with this interface. If you have a chance to type questions into the question window, please do so. I'll keep an eye on that as we go, but I'm not going to focus exclusively on the questions until I get towards the end of the broadcast, and I'll check to see what I might not have answered. We also keep a list of all the questions that were asked, and we'll follow up with an email after the session in the event that some question was not asked in advance, or I'm sorry, was not answered as we meet. Also, we're recording this session, and so the recording will be made available online shortly after the meeting ends. We take the recording and we edit it just a little bit to take out to shorten it for time and to make it a little more succinct. But if you go to www.brightsign.biz, our normal website, and if you look at the tab marked Tutorials, you'll see a section at the top of that page where past webinars have been listed and are available for viewing, and we'll do the same with this webinar here today. The BrightSign Network is a service that BrightSign offers to users who need a content management system. Now, as we've pointed out in past webinars, the BrightSign Network is not required to use BrightSign players. There are plenty of other methods for pushing content out to a player. You can simply publish directly to an SD card. You can use your local area network for publishing. You can also use your own web server as a publishing point. And detail on those methods of publishing were covered in last month's webinar on networking and publishing via the network, and you can review that presentation at our website on the tutorials page. Today we'll focus on the BrightSign Network subscription service and on how the new web UI has evolved over time and will continue to evolve into the future. If you're familiar with BrightSign gear, you know that we've always had an application available, a standalone PC application called BrightAuthor. And this BrightAuthor application continues to be the main tool for building presentations and publishing and managing content over the BrightSign network. But as we go forward, we look forward to bringing to our web-based user interface most, if not all, the features of BrightAuthor. This will take some time, and so today's presentation will focus on that snapshot of what's available right now in that UI. I've prepared a page here that summarizes the two methods of using the BrightSign network side by side, and I've highlighted in red a couple of key differences between the two. When you're faced with a question, how do I manage my players remotely, you'll have the choice, if you're a BrightSign network subscriber, to either use BrightAuthor or to use the web UI, or both. Using one does not preclude using the other. If you use the BrightSign network, the web UI is available for you to use as well. Stand by, hear somebody typing on their keyboard. Give me just a moment here to take care of that. Okay, so if you use the Web UI, you'll have some capabilities that we have not exposed in the BrightAuthor software. On the other hand, using BrightAuthor will expose some capabilities that we have not brought forward into the Web UI. I've highlighted in red the key differences between the two. For example, on the Web UI and on BrightAuthor, you're able to build and publish presentations. As you see, the very last item listed on both lists, publish and schedule presentations. But using the Web UI in the middle, highlighted in red, you'll note that we've exposed the ability to create users with roles. Now, this is a very new capability in the BrightSign network, and I'll rather than bore you with a bunch of slides, I will shortly launch the Web UI and we'll go through this in detail. But the short version is simply that a user can be assigned a certain level of permissions. For example, you could create a user who has publish authority but does not have creative authority. A user with publish authority can schedule presentations that have already been prepared and uploaded to the BrightSign network, but has no authority, if you're a publisher, to build and upload new presentations. Conversely, if you have creative authority, you can build and upload new presentations, but you cannot schedule them. You cannot set a schedule and publish them out to players. That permission is reserved for publishers. Now, of course, we have a user type we call General Manager who can do everything, and I'll show you shortly how that's done. On the BrightAuthor side, you'll note that player setup is still reserved for the BrightAuthor application. The very most initial set of configuration files that need to be prepared for a BrightSign player cannot be prepared using the Web UI. So it's still required that you use BrightAuthor at least one time to get your player connected and communicating with the BrightSign network. But once that's accomplished, the rest can be done via the Web UI. We also note that in BrightAuthor, the second bullet point here that I've marked in red is that all presentation creation functions are supported. Now, of course, this is true in BrightAuthor. And what do we mean by all? Over here on the Web UI side, we note that you can perform basic presentation creation functions. We have here a more detailed list, and it might be a little hard to see over the WebEx, but when it comes to building presentations and presentation authoring, there are still quite a few tools that you only have access to when using BrightAuthor. Most of these tools have to do with interactivity and zones. For example, if you build a new presentation in the Web UI, in today's version of the Web UI, that presentation can only be full screen. On the other hand, using BrightAuthor, I can build a multiple zoned presentation, and I can incorporate then different playlists into those different zones. The same is true for synchronization and interactivity. The tools that are needed to synchronize players to each other, such as for a video wall, or to synchronize zones within a presentation, or to build in interactive usability, to build in support for a touch screen, to control your presentation with buttons or with network commands or barcode readers, USB connected devices. Everything to do with interactivity and zones and linking zones and synchronizing players still requires BrightAuthor to build out such a presentation. It's simply not possible in today's Web UI. The good news, though, is that once such a presentation is built and uploaded to the BrightSign network, then you can use the Web UI to schedule. All the network management tools for scheduling devices and managing devices in groups, that's all fully supported on both sides. And as I mentioned earlier, BrightAuthor has no ability to define users and roles in the account. You can do that with the Web UI. Now, it's interesting to note that BrightAuthor will respect those users and roles. So if I create a user who, again, has only creative capability but has no publishing rights, if that user launches a copy of BrightAuthor and logs into the BrightSign network, then BrightAuthor will allow that user, because he's creative, will allow that user to build and upload presentations to the BrightSign network, but will not allow that user to schedule. The schedule tools will be darkened, and I'll show that here in a moment. So I'm going to quit my PowerPoint presentation and bring forward the web UI. In my example, I'm using the Firefox browser, but any standard traditional browser is supported, and I'm going to log into my account. The place to begin is www.brightsignetwork.com. That's the URL. Remember, our web page is brightsign.biz, but the porthole for access to manage and control the BrightSign network is www.brightsignetwork.com. You'll need your account name, your email address, and your password, and you can sign in. Once I'm signed in, I note a number of tabs and some account permission tools. I'm going to start here with account, and then I'm going to work my way across these tabs and walk you through all the capabilities. From account management, because I am an administrator, I have all the rights and privileges you would expect an administrator to have, and I can reset my password. I also have the ability, we're in the subject here of account administration, to create new users in the system. Presently, in my BrightSign Network account, I am the only user. But to create a new user is simply a matter of entering that user's email address. I'm going to make one up here, bogus@bogusbrooksby.com. Obviously not a real user email address. I'm going to use my mother's name here. Her name was Helen, last name Brooksby, and assign a role to this user. I'm going to give this user creative capability. The user is now created. It takes just a moment for that change to be reflected here in the web UI. A password is assigned, which I can note as an administrator if I wish to. But you'll also notice that here is the user, and the system generated an email and sent it to this email address. So the user automatically receives an email indicating that they've been set up with an account with credentials on this BrightSign Network account. And the user can simply go log in using those credentials. In fact, I'm going to sign out. Well, I better not do that because I didn't happen to note the password, so I won't be able to get in there. I won't do that right away. We'll do that a little later. Here is Helen Brooksby set up as a user, and if I go look in the creative role, I see that Helen Brooksby is assigned this role. The administrators on the account are the individuals that are listed here, and you'll see as this loads that should simply be me, R. Brooksby at brightsign.biz. So that's me. I'm the administrator, and we have a creator, Helen Brooksby. There's no limit to the number of users I choose to create, and those users can belong to any role. These are the roles. They're listed here to the side. An administrator, as you might imagine, has all power and all authority on the network. An administrator can create new users. An administrator can reassign users to different roles. And an administrator can delete users. You can even, if you've decided you want to extend your capability, create custom roles. The permission screen allows me to administer the specific privileges of a role. For example, now we've locked out these standard roles and their capabilities. We don't allow you to administer this basic set here. And notice I don't have a choice to enable or to create a new role. But in my account settings, because I'm an administrator, I can enable that. And having enabled that capability, now when I return to my permissions tab, you'll note that I can now create new roles. This becomes very, very powerful but also has the potential to be very damaging. If you create a role and you assign somebody permissions and you're not careful what you do, that person could have authority on the network that you didn't intend. So we recommend you be very careful and take very small steps as you move forward in the task of creating a new role and managing those roles. But let's assume I have a good reason to do that. I'm going to create a new role, and I'm not going to copy permissions from any set. I could choose a set of, in fact, that's a better idea. Let me choose the creator set of permissions here and create that role. My new role now exists. Notice I can delete that role. And over here, these are the roles that are standard with the system. Now we move to this side. These are the various sets of permissions that are available. And when I choose a set of permissions, I see here in this column the roles that are assigned to that set of permissions. So for example, this new role that I created with creative permissions has no ability to manage users. Those have been denied. It has no ability to manage roles. Those have been denied. But does have the ability to create and manage content. Those have been allowed. And I can expand further and see individual sub-permissions within the overall set of operations that are available here. And I could choose to not allow this individual, this role, to delete content. They're allowed to view, to upload, and to manage and assign, but they're not allowed to delete anything. I could make that very specific choice for this user. Because this user has creative permission, they have access to dynamic playlists, they have access to presentation authoring, but they do not have access to scheduling or to managing groups or devices. So you see here that as I select the set of operations and permissions on this side, I can manage what that role, the roles are assigned to do here in this column. Again, the main roles that we've defined by default are not available. Well, here I've got a role now, a new role. Let's move back to users, and let's remove my mother from her creative responsibilities here, and instead we can move down to this new role that we created, and I'll assign her those permissions. It's simply a matter of dragging the user into the role that you want them to have. If as an administrator I go back to account management and disable these role and permissions management tools, then when I come back you'll see that I no longer have the ability to create roles, but the work that I've done is preserved. This new role that I created and the assignment of my mother to that role with its set of permissions is also preserved as we move over here to the users and roles. I'll scroll down, we look at the new role, and we see that Helen Brooksby still has those permissions. So immediately, this is all found under the account management tool. You have basic settings for the individual user that would allow me to manage and reset my password for my own account. I can manage users and roles. If I'm an administrator, I have the ability to do this, as well as setting permissions within those roles, setting the specific operations and tools that an individual role is allowed to have. Now, let's roll across these tabs. I am logged in as an administrator, so I'll have every permission available to me. And let's just begin with the Groups tab. The Groups tab is where I manage groups of players. This is very similar to what you're used to seeing in the BrightSign Network, in the BrightAuthor application under the Manage tab, where you'll see individual groups. In fact, I'll go ahead and launch BrightAuthor here, and you'll see as I bring BrightAuthor forward that there's some parallelism between the two. I'm signed into the same account here with BrightAuthor. I'm already signed in. And if I go to the Manage tab, you'll see that I have two groups, an unassigned group and a default group. I have no players in either of those groups right now. But this group, if it had a player, would have this would be running the schedule of the project here that I call red. Notice that's how it's reflected in BrightAuthor, and here's how the same information is presented in the Web UI. I have the same two groups. There are no players in either group. If there were, I would see them. I can expand and collapse these groups and see the list of players, see the players that are there, and I can see what's currently scheduled to run in that group. So if in BrightAuthor I create a new group that I'll call Webinar and save that, immediately BrightAuthor creates the group in my account, and if I return to the Web UI and refresh this page, you'll see that the webinar group is created, and that's reflected now in the Web UI. So the same database that we run up in the BrightSign network behind our cloud services is driving content both to BrightAuthor and to the Web UI. This allows you to manage from either platform, whichever is most convenient to you. This webinar group that I've created, I could choose to delete it if I wished. If I delete the webinar group, the group disappears. I'll bring BrightAuthor forward and refresh my view of the BrightSign network here from BrightAuthor, and you see that the webinar group is gone. So whether I'm using BrightAuthor or using the Web UI, adding groups, it reflects itself on both sides. Now, of course, in BrightAuthor, I'm signed into my administrative account, so I have all those privileges. With a player in the group, and I'm sorry I didn't put a player in the group for today's conference. I was doing some engineering work yesterday and I took my player out of my group. But if the player were in the group, I would select it and choose Move Device, and I could move that device to another group. The Edit tab is where a lot of work will be done when it comes to building presentations. You'll see that 3 presentations exist already in the BrightSign network, and if I bring BrightAuthor forward, you'll see if I go look at my Publish tab in the BrightSign network, you'll see the same 3 presentations are presented. A presentation I call Red, a presentation called Movie Trailers, and a presentation called Wagner Fades. These 3 presentations exist up in the BrightSign network cloud. If I look at the Manage tab and look at presentations in the BrightSign network, there they are. Back to the Publish tab and back to the BrightSign network here in BrightAuthor. Now I look at the Web UI and I see the same 3 presentations. Now Edit is not available, and here's a key thing to remember. A presentation that is built in BrightAuthor and uploaded from BrightAuthor. If you've used BrightAuthor in the BrightSign network, you know that once you build a presentation and it's complete and ready to go, you choose Upload, and that presentation a copy will be moved up to the BrightSign network cloud. As soon as you do that, it's available for scheduling. In the Web UI, you will see those presentations, but you will not be able to edit them. You may remember I mentioned earlier that the Web UI does not yet expose the ability to edit complicated, interactive, multi-zone presentations. Therefore, if I've built a presentation in BrightAuthor and it takes advantage of those types of features, to expose editing that presentation here in the Web UI would be a mistake. So in the current set of rules, anything I build with BrightAuthor and upload to the network will appear here and is available for scheduling from the Web UI, but you cannot edit it. You can't modify that presentation using the Web UI. I can, however, build a new presentation. So I'll call this my webinar presentation. Choose the player type that I'm targeting. I'll target one of the new 1020s. I'm going to run 1080i in this presentation and say Create. And this brings forward the presentation authoring tool. The presentation authoring tool that we give you in the Web UI. Because we only allow you to author full screen presentations, by default you get a full screen video or images zone. You have no ability to add other zones. You have no ability to resize and reshape or change the properties of this zone per se, except that I am allowed to choose how the audio will come from the player and how images that don't properly fit the zone should be handled, whether they're scaled or stretched or centered, or how those should be handled. So I do have zone properties here, but I don't have multiple zone properties, and I can't create additional zones. It's going to be a full screen presentation. Below is my library. You'll see that this is the very same library that I'll bring up BrightAuthor. This is the very same library that you'll see in your account if you use BrightAuthor. Here are the exact same assets that exist. What a handsome guy that is. These are the exact same assets available here as you saw at the Web UI, and that's because those are all part of the library up online. To build a presentation, I simply bring items to the timeline. Very much like BrightAuthor, I can bring anything to the timeline I wish, and once it's on the timeline I can rearrange the order of things. And because this is an image video or images zone, I can mix and match still images with video. I'm going to delete that image. I'm going to delete that. I'm going to leave myself with just a few movie trailers. Of course, Harry Potter. Everybody wants to watch Harry Potter. We'll put it at the front. So there's 3 movie trailers, or 4 actually, if I could count right. Let's add the 5th. 5 movie trailers now as part of this playlist. Save. And this presentation is ready to be scheduled. Here it exists now as the webinar presentation. You'll note that it does not have the padlock icon because it was built here in the Web UI. It's available and can be edited here in the Web UI. Now, by the same token, because I built and edited this presentation in the Web UI, it's not available for editing in BrightAuthor. If I go to BrightAuthor, there's no way for me to open, even though I can schedule it. See here in the BrightAuthor, my web presentation is available for scheduling into any group I wish. But if I go to Manage and look at the presentations available, you'll see the webinar presentation is here, but there's no way in BrightAuthor to open this. There's no way to edit and manage this presentation within BrightAuthor. It was built in the Web UI, therefore it must be edited in the Web UI. On the other hand, if it's built in BrightAuthor, then it will need to be edited in BrightAuthor. But any presentation that has been uploaded can be deleted or scheduled from either side. So I could choose to delete the webinar presentation here. I can also choose to delete it from BrightAuthor. And once I delete it, it's gone. The same is true of my library. If I choose to delete an asset from the library here, that clearly and obviously the asset will disappear out of the library that I have here at the Web UI online. To schedule this presentation, I return to groups. And let's create a group. Let's get my webinar group back. So my webinar group exists, and let's go to the webinar group and schedule a presentation. Today's September 6th. Let's add a presentation. Here's my pull down of all available presentations. I'll grab the webinar presentation. I'm simply going to cheat and say run this all day, every day. You're familiar with that setting from BrightAuthor. It exists here as well, and submit. The webinar presentation is scheduled now to run all day, every day. Close. You see the update has occurred. The webinar presentation is scheduled to run in the webinar group. If I look at BrightAuthor and look at my publish schedule for the webinar group, we see that the webinar presentation is scheduled to run all day, every day. Again, you see how the same database is driving content both to BrightAuthor and via the Web UI. If I delete from BrightAuthor, remember I have administrative privileges, so I can do anything I want. And if I publish this, I get a warning that I'm publishing an empty schedule, but I'm going to say yes, publish an empty schedule, waiting for the network to reply. Okay, the network has replied that publish has taken place. If I refresh my view here of the Web UI, I note that in the webinar group, no presentation is scheduled to run. Again, the changes happen on both sides. The one thing we don't give you here is a calendar view where I can see, I can choose the day here that I want to look at, and I can see what's scheduled to run on that day. But I don't have, as I do in BrightAuthor, this 5-day-a-week hourly view of what's running. Some of you may prefer to use BrightAuthor for scheduling. I still tend to use BrightAuthor for scheduling when I need to be detailed. It's a little easier to see here in this view than it is if I look at this view. So we've discussed how to create and delete groups. We've discussed how to schedule content into groups. I've shown how both BrightAuthor and the BrightSign Network work together to reflect changes made in either side. I've shown how to build a presentation and how to manage content to that presentation. One thing you'll notice here is the ability to add files to my library. Oh, I don't have Silverlight installed on this machine. How about that? This is going to take just a moment. Bear with me while I get this installed. I'm using a new machine today, and I thought that was in place. Okay. Now I'll restart my browser. Go back to the BrightSign Network. Log in. Right back to where I was. Sorry about that delay. Okay, back to editing a presentation here to expose my library and choose the ability to add files to my library. I can select from anywhere on my hard disk whatever videos I might wish to bring up. Some of these are pretty large. Let's pick something that's smallish so that I don't have to wait. This was a video I downloaded from the internet. Start that upload, and the upload takes place to the network. Once it's uploaded, close, refresh, and the video is available here now to bring into a timeline. I could have chosen to add multiple files. So if I go to where I have 4 or 5 files, I could choose to upload a whole group. I'm not going to do that. We don't want to spend the time, but just to show you that possibility exists. Now that this item exists, it can be part of a playlist, and I can save that playlist. And if that playlist had been scheduled someplace, that change would immediately take place. I've intentionally saved the Create tab for last, so I'll come back to that here in a moment. The Current Usage tab is where I would pull a log from a player. In the BrightSign Network, I'm going to bring BrightAuthor forward. When you go to set up a player, you have the ability to enable or disable logging. We generally recommend that people leave their logging features off until they have a very specific need to turn them on, but once those logs are turned on and the player begins logging events, those event logs can be retrieved at the BrightSign network here in the current usage. If I had players in my account, I would choose the player and then I would choose the type of log that I want to download. I'm then presented here with a list of the date ranges for which those logs exist. Perhaps I'm troubleshooting a player that's misbehaving and I'd like to catch a diagnostic log out of that player whenever possible. So I would choose that player, I would choose the range of dates, and I would generate the report. And the BrightSign network will download to you a comma-separated spreadsheet. It's a very generic spreadsheet format that you can open with Excel or any spreadsheet application. I forget what the Macintosh equivalent is called right now. Numbers, I think it is. So I could open that in either Numbers or in Excel and go through that log to see what the device logs might tell me. The playback log is particularly handy if I need to prove that content is playing at a particular player or group of players. We've talked about managing groups, building and uploading and managing presentations. So let's talk lastly about this Create tab. My Create tab is empty right now, but right here's the key. This is my Web UI tool for building and uploading dynamic playlists. A dynamic playlist is a unique type of playlist both in the BrightSign network and in BrightAuthor. In BrightAuthor, it's called Create as well. And here, if I wanted to build a dynamic playlist, I would do so by choosing content for that playlist from perhaps my videos folder. I think I've got some right here at this level. Yep. So maybe I build a very simple short playlist here, save it as Ray's new dynamic playlist. I'll save it here where I save my other BrightAuthor stuff. That's saved, and then I upload it to the network. While that uploads, I'm going to bring the Web UI forward. I could do the same here. Another playlist. This is a dynamic playlist. Choose Create. I get my library and I throw a few items into that dynamic playlist and choose Save. Now notice that both playlists now exist. In BrightAuthor, the upload here is complete. So the Ray's new dynamic playlist has been uploaded to the network, and I see it right here, Ray's new dynamic playlist. Here's the other dynamic playlist that I created using the Web UI. Both dynamic playlists now exist. Now a dynamic playlist is a special type of playlist. When I go back to edit my presentation, and let's go to this webinar presentation that I built before, and we'll see here in the timeline the individual assets that I had put to that playlist. But I don't see down here in my library these new dynamic playlists that I just built, and that's because they're behind this tab. There's another dynamic playlist that I created using the Web UI and Ray's new dynamic playlist that I created using BrightAuthor. I can bring these into my timeline and put them on the timeline wherever I wish. Remember that Ray's dynamic playlist, I'm going to save what I've done, that Ray's dynamic playlist is actually these two files. So now in the playlist, as this project runs, the timeline will roll through this file, then it will play all the files that were in this dynamic playlist, then it will continue to the remaining files in the playlist before it loops. So think of it as a playlist within a playlist. And they're particularly handy because now wherever I use this dynamic playlist and however many different presentations I might choose to use it, if I need to change it, I can come here to do so. I can pull this item from the playlist, put this item in the playlist, save it, and everywhere in any number of presentations that I happen to use that dynamic playlist, that sub-playlist has been modified. It's a particularly handy way to build, if you will, playlist building blocks, tools that will let you manage content without having to update, 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 or 12 different playlists. I can manage the playlist in one place and then reuse that building block in as many presentations as I wish. Now, I think I've covered all the basics that I intended to cover in the time we're together here today. So I'm going to take a look at the question list and see, I'm going to turn off screen sharing, so bear with me while I do that and get ready to answer your questions. And instead, I'm going to share just my browser window. So that you can see my browser window without seeing my entire desktop. And that will allow me to take a look at questions that have been asked and see if I can answer those in the time that remains. A few questions have been asked. There's a question here about live input to the player. It's not a question that we'll address in our seminar today, as we're talking only about the Web UI. So we'll make sure that question gets answered in email offline. There's a question here about the Alcorn Digital Media Manager. It's another customer's product, and I'm sorry, I don't know the product, so I can't answer that. There's a question about looping presentations and having it run for extended periods of time. I think I've answered that in the course of our presentation, but let me show you. If I take a player group and assign, well, let's start with the webinar presentation I created. And you'll note that this webinar presentation has these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 items in the playlist. So that 7 items in the playlist will play for some period of time. When I then schedule that to run, I'll add that presentation to run. I'm going to have it run all day, every day. So that presentation will now loop within that group all day, every day. There's that project will never end. It will run and run and run and run. So the answer about looping a presentation is yes. A presentation will loop within the time that it's scheduled to run. If it's a 10-minute presentation and you schedule it to run for an hour, it will run 6 times to fill that hour. It will loop. A question here about formats that can be added to the library. The formats that are added that we support in our library are all the formats that we also support in BrightAuthor and that you can see from our web page. I'm going to go to the BrightSign website. BrightSign.biz. Here's the BrightSign website. In our support tab, under frequently asked questions, it's at the top of the list. What formats are supported by BrightSign players? And it's the usual list of MPEGs, MPEG-1, MPEG-2, and MPEG-4, or sometimes called H.264, in the normal set of file extensions, MP4, TS, MPG, VLB. We also support the graphics, the still image formats, JPEG, PNG, GIF, and bitmap. So those are the formats that you can upload. We support also WMV if it's a Windows Media 9. This is what's exported from PowerPoint, and that's why we put it in there, so that you could export PowerPoint presentations as video projects. You cannot just drop a PowerPoint presentation on a BrightSign player, because a PowerPoint presentation is stored in a Microsoft proprietary format. The player can't render that. But if you export the PowerPoint presentation as a video, then yes, it can play. A good question here about knowing the subscription status of your player. And this is where I'm at a loss because I didn't put my player in here. You would see from the current usage table, you would see all the players that you have on your account and their current expiration date. So yes, that is listed here. A question about whether or not an administrator can change the password of a user. Let's try that with my mother. I've never tried doing that. Let's go look at the account that I set up for my mother. Here is her account. I don't see her password. Yeah, I don't have permission to change her password, and that makes sense because passwords should be private. So generally what happens, I'm going to sign out of the BrightSign network. A user would change their own password. I can delete my mother as a user, and then I could recreate her, and that would assign a new default password. But if I come to my account and I don't remember my password, I simply click Forgot Password, and it will give me the option to receive. I enter my account and my email, and submit that, and it will reset my password and send me an email. Now I don't want to do that because I don't want to reset my password, but that's how you would do that. Now I'm going to log back in as myself. The question is about using RS-232s and RS-232 control. That's an interactive feature. You can use RS-232 controls if you build the presentation in BrightAuthor, and if you upload that presentation to the network, you will be able to schedule it from the Web UI, but you will not be able to modify anything about how that interactive presentation is built. That's the end of questions that I can answer at this moment. There were a couple of questions in the system about live text and other features of BrightAuthor that we'll answer via email. So we've come to a conclusion. I want to take a moment again and just thank you for joining us today. We've got 50 some odd people on the webinar. We recorded the webinar and we'll make it available for upload. Please feel free to send us a note or let us know by call the sales guy or send us a note and let us know how other topics that are interesting to you. We've got a growing list of topics we plan to review, and we look forward to doing those with you. I hope it's been productive. Again, my name is Ray Brooksby, and thanks for joining us today. Hopefully we'll see you next month at the new webinar. Thank you all, and goodbye.